We need on-site renewable energy, high efficiency, and all-electric homes everywhere in order to have a safe, just transition.
There are going to be incredible opportunities for workers in this new energy economy.
That environmental justice is also about communities being able to take charge of their own infrastructure.
Since 2018, the United States has expanded our list of critical minerals from 35 to 50, as supply chains have become increasingly concentrated in fewer countries and the needs for minerals in industrial and consumer products have increased. In April of 2022, the Biden administration began making serious federal policy moves to secure critical mineral supply chains by invoking the Defense Production Act to increase domestic production of minerals used to develop batteries for electric vehicles and other energy storage applications. The move signaled a recognition that without securing critical mineral supply chains, the U.S. would not be able to compete in emerging energy technology markets, and we would not be able to meet our electrification and decarbonization goals. To many in the domestic mining industry, the move was a surprising turn of favor, since just 3 months prior, the administration revoked the federal leases for the Twin Metals mine in Minnesota that contains copper, nickel, cobalt, and platinum group elements. This was not the only mine in the U.S., or even Minnesota for that matter, that was facing federal judicial and/or permitting challenges to operation. Those include the Polymet copper and nickel mine in Minnesota, Ioneer lithium mine in Nevada, the Resolution and Rosemont copper mines in Arizona, and the Pebble copper and gold mine in Alaska. For certain critical minerals, a single mine closure would eliminate domestic production, as the U.S. has only one domestic nickel mine, the Eagle mine in Michigan, and one lithium mine in Nevada. All indications are that the change in federal policy is not temporary. It is a result of geopolitical trends that are challenging global supply chains for critical minerals and domestic energy priorities that increase critical mineral demand. The context is that we are in a global race for the future of energy, making the capacity for critical mineral extraction, refining, and clean tech manufacturing in today's economy equivalent to historic development of petroleum extraction and refining capacity. To punctuate the challenge facing the U.S., the production of many critical minerals today is more geographically concentrated than oil or natural gas has ever been, with China playing a dominant role in the processing of nearly every mineral. It is hard to overestimate the scale of domestic and global need for critical minerals to meet climate goals. Projections from the World Resources Institute show staggering critical mineral needs to meet the CO2 emission reduction targets set out in the Paris Agreement. Their study shows that by 2040, we will need 42 times more lithium production, 25 times more graphite production, 21 times more cobalt, 19 times more nickel, etc. By 2040, the energy sector is expected to grow to become the biggest end user for critical minerals, using a staggering 90% of the world's lithium, 70% of the cobalt, 60% of the nickel, 43% of the copper, and 42% of all rare earth elements. If these figures seem daunting, they are. The skeptics say that never in history have we ramped up production of any single commodity this quickly on a global scale, and a polarized United States divided in our vision of the future and consumed by the culture war is not up to the challenge. A look at recent federal policy moves, though, might have you questioning the harsh judgment of our critics. Beyond the Defense Production Act, the U.S. federal government passed the CHIPS Act, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and Inflation Reduction Act to jumpstart the process. The sum of the provisions make a pretty compelling case for rapid and widespread electrification. This includes nearly $5 billion of support for battery recycling, mineral exploration, demonstration projects, manufacturing, and research, and an additional $2 billion in research, development, and production of semiconductors and related manufacturing materials. Mining companies excavating 50 different critical minerals will be able to seek a production tax credit equal 10% of the production costs. And as we discussed in our episode on electric vehicles, the 30% tax credit for EVs immediately requires that 40% of the battery components come from North America. This gradually raises to 100% requirement by 2029. These provisions, paired with the funding and lending authority in the bills, offer significant stimulus. To fully electrify our transportation system with clean energy, we'll need all the help we can get. A typical electric car requires 6 times the mineral inputs of a conventional car. Lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and graphite are crucial to battery performance, longevity, and energy density. EVs and battery storage have already displaced consumer electronics to become the largest consumer of lithium and are set to take over from stainless steel as the largest end user of nickel by 2040. Building smaller cars with shorter range can reduce both the mineral needs and costs, but with the announced cancellation of the Chevy Bolt, we are already seeing automakers prioritize bigger, more expensive, and longer range vehicles. Beyond EVs, the demand for new electricity infrastructure can be reduced by focusing on energy efficiency and load management in the distribution system, coupled with a more interconnected transmission system to bring cheap wind and solar energy where it is needed. Yet, as we discussed, each of these strategies face significant political, social, and economic barriers. In addition, mining activities do not enjoy broad public support, especially in the Midwest states, facing local opposition driven by the immediate and long-term pollution concerns presented by sulfide mining operations that are typical for critical mineral extraction in the upper Midwest. Yet, there are promising new breakthroughs being reported weekly concerning new battery chemistries, battery recycling innovations, and domestic supply chain opportunities such as production of lithium from geothermal fluids in Southern California's Lithium Valley. Lithium extraction from geothermal fluids in the region is reported as having the potential to support 70% of domestic lithium needs, with the operations being completely powered by geothermal energy. This is a promising development, and we'll need to continue to innovate in this manner to transition our energy system away from fossil fuels. To further explore the potential of domestic mining and refining of critical minerals and discuss the challenges, we talked with 2 experts working in the Midwest. We first talked with Dr. Snehamoy Chatterjee, Associate Professor of Geological and Mining Engineering and Sciences at Michigan Tech, about the mining process, domestic needs, and mining innovations. And we talk with Dr. Al Geddix, Emeritus Professor at UW-La Crosse, about the historic and current challenges facing sulfide mining in the Midwest.
Learn more about mining and all the big topics in energy at the 32nd Annual Energy Fair, June 23rd through the 25th. Connect with the MREA training team, industry professionals, and the nicest people you'll ever meet on the fairgrounds in Custer, Wisconsin. MREA members get in for free. Maybe even find yourself lacing up your running shoes and taking part in the inaugural Energy Fair 5K. Learn more about this and what else you can expect at the fair at theenergyfair.org.
We are joined today by Snehamoy Chatterjee. He's a professor of geological and mining engineering and sciences at Michigan Tech. He was a professor at the National Institute of Technology in India and now focuses on mine planning, machine reliability, safety evaluation, the application of artificial intelligence in mining problems. He's also a member of the International Association of Mathematical Geosciences, the Society for Mining, Metallurgy, and Exploration, as well as the Society of Mining Professors. We're excited to talk. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's obviously a hot topic of conversation in clean energy with kind of a renewed focus on domestic mining for critical minerals. So maybe to get started, Snehamoy, would you like to just tell us a little bit about your background and what you're focusing on?
I graduated with a degree in mining engineering, so my bachelor, master's, and PhD all are in mining engineering. My PhD focuses on resource evaluation from what we can see subsurface using exploration drilling data, both using statistical and machine learning algorithms, and then we applied the image processing or computer vision to monitor the quality of the parameters while sending material from mine site to process unit. So because sending the proper quality material is extremely important for industry to maintain the quality that the industry is delivering to their customers. So we thought that the understanding the what you have subsurface, and then understanding what you are sending to your customer and integrate them together to better understand the subsurface. So we are trying to use the knowledge that we are gaining to better understand the subsurface, which is most unreliable estimates of the entire mining value chain.
I wonder if you followed the announcement recently of Sweden announced that they found a new critical mineral deposit. Did you follow a bit of that? How do they find new minerals?
It's all about, if you have an underground operating mines and it's a metal mine with the multiple elements, the industry or the company always want to expand that operation. If they have their own exploration geology team, they always go and drill extra drill holes and try to follow what's the continuity of the deposit. That is something all mining company does around the globe. If you take an example from Eagle Mine, which is one of the operating nickel copper mine in United States, which is sitting in 2 hours from our campus, I know last 3-4 years they are doing a lot of the exploration from their underground operation. So that's how the Eagle East, which is the small deposit, the discover while operating on the main Eagle ore body. And again, now when they are operating other area of the deposit, they can always go and do exploration drilling, and that cost would be much lesser than doing exploration for the surface, because you already know where you have your stuff. And that is how the Kiruna the deposit in Sweden been discovered, like an REE part, because they know what they want to explore, and they started following those directions and touch the jackpot, you can say.
This type of exploration is expanding in this kind of electrification context. So maybe let's dive in here, and maybe you can help us understand what are some of the major minerals needed for electrification, and how, if at all, is this kind of changing the mining industry that you've noticed?
So you will see that if you just use the electric vehicle, one of the critical part is the battery, and the lithium is one of the critical minerals for that. And apart from that, you can think about nickel, cobalt, graphite, all sorts of REEs, rare earth elements. You can think about aluminum, some extent, copper, manganese. So I can think about these few elements, including the 16, 17 REEs that are critically needed for any kind of the green revolution. Definitely there should be some more, but these are the major things, major elements that I can think of at this point.
Where are most of these minerals found and processed, and to your understanding, which nations basically control most of the supply chains, which is the big conversation today?
If you look at some of the critical minerals, the lithium, manganese, cobalt, nickel, graphite, you will see they are little bit diversified. It's not concentrated in one specific country. Say for an example, if you look at lithium, the Australia is one of the leading producer at this point. The different country might have a lot of reserve which they are not declaring or announcing. So similarly, if you look at the copper, like in Chile, again Australia, if you are looking at the graphite and REEs, then China is dominating that market, and that domination is like a huge, almost 70 to 80% of the share comes from those countries.
Is China also dominating most of the processing, as far as like the development into products?
Yes, and there is some reason why they do that. The reason is that the processing of this material, if you look at the environmental impacts of mining and an entire value chain, the most of the footprint or damage or whatever you can call comes from the processing side, because you use a lot of acids and all other kind of stuff to do the processing of those materials. If you have lighter regulation in your country where you are processing the materials, So you can get a lot of investment on that sectors. It doesn't mean that when you talk about a specific country, it doesn't mean that all that the processing units owned by their own companies. So there are a lot of foreign investors investing on those country and bringing material from other part of the world where they have their own operation and then processing the material and sending back to the other places. So yeah, definitely the processing side of most of the critical minerals are dominated by the China at this point.
We are an integrated global economy, so it seems very challenging to separate this idea of extraction and processing, or to build a domestic kind of supply chain for that with such a dominance in China, which I think is an interesting point. On the extraction side, we can dig in a little bit and talk kind of the methods used to mine these materials, and what are some of the challenges associated with that, and how is the industry kind of addressing those challenges?
If we are looking at the mining method, mining from the rock means if you think about lithium can mine from the rock as well as the salt and brine, but other critical minerals mostly the extracted from rock. Extracting rock is like a very simple, straightforward process. Is the same method, same economic consideration, same design criteria across the globe and across the minerals. The mining methods are decided based on the geotechnical parameters, based on the economics, and based on the location or the depth of the deposit and the size of the deposit. If you are doing mining of, say, copper or mining of nickel, their mining method may not be significantly different if their cost of operation and cost of mining and the price of metal are not significantly different. Say, for example, if you have a dollar per ton of the price of a material or the ore that you are mining, and other has a $10 per ton, so you can generate more revenue from the second one as compared to the first one. So you have more flexibility to spend money to dig that material. So which means that if that material, the same material available at 200 feet depth, then one material might be economical whereas other might not, given that price value. And all those geotechnical and geopolitical scenarios and the demand and stuff, your price can go sky high.
So it's important for the industry that there be a high valuable mineral content in the rock. And so part of it is finding a deposit that has a high mineral content, because the cost of mining is going to be the same whether it's a low content or high content.
Absolutely. Yep.
So then once the rock is mined, it has to be improved, right? It has to go through a process to extract the mineral. Would you like to talk a little bit about how that happens and where mostly it occurs?
So this is the mineral processing or metallurgy side, like you are bringing the material and then you are crossing them. So the crossing is basically making all the size equal so that you can feed to the process unit. And then there are multiple different methods you can apply. You can do like an flotation for some of the material. You can do gravity separation because and that is the part of the flotation tank. And I am not a metallurgist, so I might not able to tell exact the technical the word they use, but the fundamental principle here is based on the density of the material, you can separate them at the different level of the flotation tank. Using copper, nickel, and other critical minerals, processing easier because they have a unique density, unique separation mechanism, so you can easily separate them. But if you look at the REE, rare earth elements, so they are not actually rare in the earth. They are actually plenty of material if you put together all the rocks. But they are so complicated, chemically bonded, that extracting them from one another is significant problem. So that's why we call them as rare. It's rarely possible to separate one from another. There are multiple different way you can process. So if your grade is high, you can always do plant-based processing like in flotation. If your grade is low, you can do leaching, and leaching is one of the problem environmentally because you have to add acid and you have to allow the acid to flow over your material. It has pros and cons and all the stuff that needs to be considered while you are processing those materials.
Yeah, and my understanding is that in the United States, in a number of applications, a lot of time that rock material, that unimproved material, is transported somewhere else to do the processing because of some of the concerns about acid mine waste. Is that true?
Yeah, and again, the different state within that United States has a different mining regulation. And one state might be a little bit favorable for mining, whereas other state might have a stricter environmental and permitting process to do mining. The partially true, not completely, because some states still allow kind of the processing in that state boundary, but some state has some strict regulation to process those material.
As I'm sure you're aware, the recent federal legislation in the United States, the CHIPS Act, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Inflation Reduction Act, they all have their own kind of incentives to expand exploration and mining. Are you seeing kind of an impact in the industry and renewed interest? What are you seeing?
I saw a lot of interest from Department of Energy that they are try to communicate with not only the researcher or scientists across the country, but they also trying to involve the community as well as the companies to get some money, invest on the mining, explore for the critical minerals, as well as do some processing of some of those materials. I would say these are the great initiative to improve the culture of the need of mining in this country, because if you want to go for the green energy, you really need those materials. You cannot be self-sufficient or say, okay, we can be a zero carbon country by this time without having all those materials available. And you cannot completely rely on your allies, right? You might have friends and politically similar the ideology who wants to work together, but this is a political scenario, right? And if something happened in other country, that will impact that scenario. So you have to have some level of your own infrastructure that can help at least process if you are not mining, because mining is where you have, right? You cannot shift from one place to the other. Means you can mine and you can ship the material to the one place to other and process there. So infrastructure in processing and do more exploration definitely improve the supply line of these critical minerals.
I think the context in the United States is, with our geography, a very abundant geography, there's many, many opportunities. But I think the real question is, what is the state of the mining industry in the United States? And from your perspective, as a researcher and working on exploration, what innovations do you see? What challenges, what needs do you see kind of in the mining industry? Maybe even labor needs in the mining industry to really kind of meet this need.
That is what industry is suffering. So the critical challenge at this point is the skilled manpower. If you look at the mining university in the country, the 2014-15, we graduated almost 1,600 mining engineers. But if you look at 2011-2022, the number drops down dramatically. It's almost 50%. Now we are graduating 800 students cumulative from all the mining school in this country. That is a critical challenge for the industry to get a skilled manpower. And as mining industry is expanding, because we know we need more critical minerals and stuff, so we need more mining and we need more skilled manpowers. And we really don't see like an significant interest from the school student to do mining. So I believe there is a gap between society and the industry that we are unable to teach our community that the mining industry is not bad. It has a lot of opportunity. If you want to be an AI professional and want to do mining, you still can do that. If you are interested in robotics and do mining, you have an opportunity there. If you like driving autonomous vehicle, means you cannot drive in the road, but you can do in mining, because a lot of mining companies are using autonomous truck for their fleet. Like, and if you look at some of the Australian mine in Western Australia, means there are some mines complete the transportation fleets are autonomous and electrified. So industry is doing their job. We need more the people. The mining nowadays is not mining of say 30-40 years back. There was not stipulated regulation, not environmental laws properly aligned. So now if you look at the mine and the way they are operating, they are more environmentally friendly. They are try to make a least amount of footprint and try to process the waste material. So try to get a zero the waste industry. So the industry is doing their job. Some extent need some help to improve the infrastructure. That is what the federal and other state are trying to put some effort, both financially as well as some administrative support and research support, which definitely help reaching the goal in future.
It sounds like, which is not surprising because most industries are suffering from a labor shortage. It sounds like particularly in the mining industry, there's this lack of social buy-in or a broken social contract, and maybe this kind of envisioning of like reshoring and domestic supply chains for an less carbon intensive electrified future might be a good way for the industry and your program and others to attract the next generation of students. It seems alarming that, we live, just look at behind me here, the solar panel behind me, it requires extraction. The computers we're talking on require extraction. Cars, whether they be combustion engines or electric vehicles, require extraction, and that we're only in this country graduating 800 engineers total a year seems like a bit of a future threat. So, I think you started talking a little bit about some of the innovation in the industry. Areas in the world do you see kind of adopting mining innovations and are really moving forward in a positive way with extraction? Do you have any good examples that you would say that we could look into further?
Both Australia and Canada, they are doing pretty good job in bringing technology innovation in their mining operation. If you look at electrification of the trucks and other vehicles operating in the mines, if you are interested to know about the robotics and other automation, both in the processing side as well as the mining side, there are lots of companies, the big companies in these two countries are doing great job. And also some of the company, they are operating in United States but also has their operation in either of these two countries. They are adopting those technologies in United States as well. The AI, the digital twins, the automation, electrification. So these are the few things that the industries are adopting. Big data and data analytics and all kind of stuff.
You talked about this a little bit, but maybe we could dive in a little deeper. Do you think it's feasible, based on kind of what you're saying, that we in the United States actually develop most of the supply chains for these materials ourselves? Or do you think that based on where the reserves are and the state of the industry, that it will continue to need to be kind of lots of international partnerships to make this happen?
if you are considering all the critical minerals, including REEs, it's very difficult. You will get everything from one specific geographic location. You definitely need some partners. So you can develop your process plant here, but you cannot develop your, say for example, graphite or alumina if you don't have that in subsurface, right? So you can develop technology to extract metals from the minerals. You definitely need some partners, at least for few critical minerals where they have their deposits. And also needs a lot of the exploration to understand their availability inside the in United States, because there are a lot of the things that we don't know because we do not have a full scale the exploration, and because that costs a lot. Like, and if you do go and do exploration, that needs a huge amount of money. The company will spend money when you will see that there is a profit, right? Means the companies are not here to do charity, so they will spend money when they will know that this price is going high and this places has some kind of the information that is giving a positive indication of existence of this kind of minerals. The short answer is, if you want to be completely self-sufficient with the supply of all critical minerals, then answer would be no. You need some partner. But if you do infrastructure development and things like that, there is a potential opportunities. People will come and invest, and you also need a good environment for the company to invest in this country. If you look at the big company, they might have a head office in this country, but they do not have a single operating mines in this country.
My understanding is that, one of the challenges in the U.S. is that currently there's only one operating nickel mine in the country. You mentioned it. It's Eagle Mine near your campus in Michigan. The facility that ships its concentrates abroad for refining is scheduled to close in a few years. And we only also have one lithium mine, the Silver Peak mine in Nevada. Mm-hmm. And so it's not as if we have been very active in mining in the United States. So it seems to me like there will need to be, at the very least, an expansion of operations of extraction in the United States. I wonder if you have more context there.
Extraction is the second stage. You need to discovery of the deposit first, and that need a lot of investment. The company spend money when they know that, okay, we have at least some amount of the chance that if we do invest to explore more in this area, we have a potential operation. So if there is a zero chance or there is no information, they will not go and invest and try to do mining. So the thought would be like, there are some initiative by federal agencies including USGS to generate a lot of preliminary data over the different parts of the country to identify some potential zones. So, and I think that we need to accelerate or even expand that program more so that more area can be explored for the primary study, where from people or company can see the benefits of spending more on that area to do exploration. You cannot ask a company and go and say, okay, go and do exploration there. They are looking for open source information that indicates that, okay, this area might have a potential benefits or source of this kind of minerals. And then only they will go and do invest, because the exploration also costs like at least 3 to 5% of total mine life cost. Means if you consider the mining operation as 100%, then 3 to 5% cost will go to the exploration. So it's a lot of money.
If you were to start with exploration and then like permitting, extraction, improvement, how long of a time frame are we talking about to get a mine operational?
It can take, means it is not from the discovery, from the company started exploration and then they prepare the report and start mining. That can take 3 to 5 years minimum, because the permitting process is more like strategic. You need to get the environmental permitting, air, water, and all different kind of. If you have a native community, so then you have to go through those stuff. If you have a religion, beliefs, and all kind of stuff involved in that area, you have to get those kind of approval as well. So depending on the state, your approval process are different, but more or less you will see approving documents or approval you need from different agencies within the state before start operation. And mining business, I'm not talking about the critical minerals at this point, but if you look at the industry, it's very cyclic. Like it goes the boom and then goes recession, goes up. So now if I start investing now, and by the time I'm on the verge of production and the price goes down, then I may not able to start mining. There are a lot of things involved in this process, but definitely the permitting process takes a significant amount of time.
If we just look at batteries, the critical composition of batteries is changing relatively rapidly, and a lot of it is based on price signal. So, if you have a high price of cobalt, then people will move away from it, and by the time you get your cobalt production in line, the batteries have already moved away from that technology. So there surely are some challenges there in this long time frame. I guess in this big context, we've covered quite a bit of ground here, but if we are to see kind of a resurgence of kind of mineral extraction and processing in the United States to meet our electrification goals and carbon reduction goals, what are some of the critical steps that you see that we need to take?
Most of the steps are already been taken and started, like in delivering things from there, like an investment on exploration, not only the mining exploration, but the geological exploration to understand the feasibility of the presence of those minerals. The USGS is doing pretty good job on that. Their phase 1 was very successful. They are going through the phase 2. I think they might need more on that side. If you look at the geography of United States, is a very, very large area, and covering that large area is require lots of money and the manpowers. And we still believe that there are some scope to improve that or expanding that part. The research is definitely required for the processing part, because if your processing technology is not efficient and cost effective, you cannot break down the cost as compared to your revenue. So even it goes sky high, if your processing cost is sky high, then you do not get the benefits that the companies are looking for. So definitely these are the two, and then I don't know how we can do that, but bringing more people in mining education and mining industry so that industry get trained manpower to work.
We may all be competing for talent, Snehamoy. It may be the truth.
I know.
We need talent everywhere. Well, it has been a pleasure talking with you today. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we let you get back to your important research?
No, Miss. I think it's a great initiative, and these kind of podcasts or videos help people understand the needs and the essence of mining, and I highly appreciate your effort to do that. So thank you for inviting me on that.
Since 1990, the Midwest Renewable Energy Association has been offering industry-leading training for solar photovoltaics. Whether you want to start a career in the renewable energy field, maintain a credential, or install solar at your home, the MREA has a variety of courses to advance your skills. Learn more at midwestrenew.org/training-programs.
We are here today with Al Geddes. He's Emeritus Professor of Environmental Sociology at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, and he's also the Executive Secretary of the Wisconsin Resources Protection Council. You may know or have heard of Al because he has a long history researching metallic sulfide mining in Wisconsin and other upper Midwest states, and done a lot of work with tribal communities impacted by mining operations. Al, thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm glad to be here.
We're excited to talk to you because, as you know, there's an increased interest in metallic sulfide mining in Wisconsin, and we want to know more about it. And so maybe you could just get us started by telling us a little bit about your work studying metallic sulfide mining.
Well, I started my interest in mining in general as part of a Latin American collective called Community Action on Latin America. And I looked at the export mineral economies of Chile and Peru and decided that those resources did not benefit the people of those countries. And I wrote about that. And that's when I was invited to a conference in 1976 called Indian Tribes as Developing Nations. And the basic idea was that the same corporations and policies that led to the lack of development from those mineral resources in the third world also applied within Indian reservations. And it was at that conference that I met the tribal council members from the Mole Lake, Sikagan, Chippewa community who had just been told that their reservation was directly downstream from Exxon's discovery of a large zinc copper deposit that would discharge pollutants into the stream that feeds the tribe's wild rice lake. The entire economy and culture of the Mole Lake tribe was based upon their location at that site and the harvesting of wild rice as a major source of their food and also of their culture. And so I was asked by the tribe to assist them in protecting their reservation resources from potential mining pollution. And at that point, we developed a plan involving legal and technical and fundraising efforts to allow the tribe to develop some ability to understand what the impacts of that proposed project would be, and also what legal tools they had to oppose that project. And over the next 28 years, the tribe, along with tribes downstream, 4 other tribes downstream, and the surrounding communities opposed the project and successfully stopped the project in 2003, when the 2 tribes that were the most directly affected by the project, Mole Lake and the Forest County Potawatomi, bought the site and the mineral rights from the current owner of the project at that point. So that was a major long-term effort that demonstrated power of grassroots social movements and informed tribal communities and rural communities in understanding and opposing large-scale mining projects that could have a detrimental effect upon their community and upon their health and their environment. And of course, that project was one of the first major, wasn't the first, but it was one of the first large-scale sulfide mine deposits, which means that the zinc and the copper were embedded in a geological rock structure where the dominant mineral was pyrite or fool's gold, which is a sulfide mineral. And when those sulfide minerals are excavated and brought to the surface and crushed, they spread out and pose a problem called acid mine drainage, which releases both acid as well as releases other heavy metals in the waste rock, including arsenic, lead, and mercury. That would be a significant environmental and health hazard to the community. And wherever you have these sulfide mines, whether they're gold or silver or copper or zinc, it doesn't make any difference. The basic chemistry is the same, which is that it releases acid mine drainage. And once that process starts, it doesn't stop until all the waste material in the rock has been exhausted. And those processes can take hundreds and thousands of years. So the copper mines going back to the Roman Empire are still releasing acid mine drainage 2,000 years later.
Your experience is very interesting and relevant today, as I'm sure you're aware, since as we have moved, and with recent federal legislation, we'll move towards further electrification, and substantially in the context of climate change. Much of the world's lithium, for example, comes from the Atacama Desert, which you're familiar with. That's the same Bolivia, Argentina extractive process. and there is increased interest in opening up domestic mining to shore up domestic supply chains. You talked a little bit about what metallic sulfide mining is. Maybe you could expand a little bit on some of the methods that are used, and my understanding is also that the further processing of that material actually usually isn't done in the United States. It's sent to Canada. So when somebody does do a sulfide mining extraction, what does it look like? Do they crush the rock? Is it big machines? Is it done with dynamite? Is there leaching that happens here? And explain the process.
There are two major excavation processes. One is open pit, and the other is underground mining. The open pit is a large area where they blast the rock and then scoop it up in these large trucks and bring it to a concentrator where they crush it, douse it with all sorts of toxic chemicals like sulfuric acid. And the same thing for underground mining, where they go thousands of feet under the ground and bring it to the surface and send it to the same milling process, where the end product of that milling is a mine waste that are called tailings. And these tailings contain all the heavy metals that are part of the waste stream now. They extract the usable, the valuable gold or copper or zinc. And the vast majority of the rock, which is 99% of the rock material that comes out of the ground, ends up as waste in the form of either crushed rock or tailings. And those tailings contain all these sulfide minerals, plus all of the heavy metals, and they have to be placed on site in piles that are known as a tailings pond or a tailings management facility, which can be an enormous part of the landscape after the mining process is done. Some of these tailings piles, go on for at least a mile. They can be piled up to several hundred feet high. It's one of the largest engineered structures in the world. And these piles are extremely unstable because of the water that is released along with the crushed rock from the milling site that go into the tailings pond. And that water eventually seeps down into the fine tailings underneath, and over time can destabilize the integrity of the structure. And especially in the upper Midwest, where we have a lot of extreme weather events, heavy rainfall and snowfall, hurricanes, tornadoes, those weather events can accelerate the dissolution of these tailings ponds. Over the past 70 years, the vast majority of the failures of tailings ponds have occurred relatively recently, from the 1990s through the 2000s. And the reason for that is because over the last several decades, the grade of the ores that are extracted are extremely low quality and low quantity. And so therefore, in order to make the whole operation profitable, they have to extract large amounts of these very low grade materials. And what happens is that you get large amounts of waste material, the finer and the less valuable the ore deposits. And so as you exhaust the most valuable ores around the world, you end up with having to extract low grade ores that produce ever greater quantities of mine waste, which pose problems for the integrity of these structures. Now, in the case of the Flambeau mine, which was actually the first metallic sulfide mine in Wisconsin in 1990, that was a copper and a gold mine, and the ores were sufficiently rich that they did not produce tailings. They simply crushed the ore and put the crushed rock into rail cars and sent up to Canada for processing. But that was the exception. All of the other proposals in Wisconsin will not send the crushed ore. They will do some minimal processing on site, which means that they will produce enormous tailings piles all over northern Wisconsin in areas that are water rich and liable to feel the detrimental effects of any kind of discharge, either a gradual discharge or a catastrophic discharge of waste material into surrounding water bodies. In Brazil in 2019, there was a spill of a large tailings dam from a major iron ore company in Brazil, one of the largest in the world. And it released millions of tons of toxic tailings into the local river, overwhelmed the entire town of Brumadinho, Brazil, and killed 270 people in the path of that tailings disaster. And these are the kinds of structures and the kinds of technologies which mining companies right now are proposing all over Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, the same kind of structures that have resulted in these catastrophic failures around the world are the same technologies which are being proposed in Wisconsin. Now, the difference, as you point out, between 5 years ago and the last several years is that now we have this increased emphasis upon metals that are going to go into green technologies, electric vehicles, and so on. The problem is places in Wisconsin where these companies are arguing that those metals are essential for green technologies do not contain the kind of minerals that will be relevant for the electric vehicles. So the Bend deposit in Taylor County in the Chequamegon Nicolet National Forest is basically a gold deposit. There's a minor amount of copper. Copper is not really a critical material for electric vehicles. Copper is certainly used in some wind and other energy sources, but it's not in short supply. The other deposit, the Reef deposit in Marathon County, right next to the Eau Claire Dells, which is the area where the Eau Claire River flows, that is an exclusively gold deposit. Gold is not a critical mineral, has nothing whatever to do with green energy, but the chairman and the chief executive officer of this company, Greenlight Metals, is promoting the Reef deposit as essential to the green economy. This is what we call greenwashing. It's trying to make a process which has historically resulted in significant environmental degradation of the water, groundwater and surface water, as well as air quality and the health of the residents of these communities, into a benign technology which ignores the fundamental realities of metallic sulfide mining, where the record of the industry is perfectly clear. There are no examples where you have sulfide mining and you do not have acid mine drainage and heavy metal contamination. In 1998, the people that I worked with and the tribes and the rural communities passed the mining moratorium legislation, also known as Wisconsin's Prove It First legislation, which required before a mining permit would be granted, the company had to demonstrate where in the United States or Canada they had mined in a sulfide ore body without contaminating either groundwater or surface water. The mining industry told us continually that they can do these mines safely. So all the legislation did was say, show us where it's been done. They could not provide a single example of where it had been done. And so from 1998 until 2017, no company in Wisconsin was able to get a permit to either explore or mine because they could not meet the requirements of the Prove It First legislation. In 2017, the Republican legislature and Governor Walker overturned the mining moratorium legislation, and now Wisconsin communities do not have that kind of protection that would allow them to require that mining companies demonstrate that these mines will not pollute groundwater and surface water where these mines are being proposed.
Thank you for that detailed summary. It's our understanding also and our concern that some of the justification for metallic sulfide mining necessary for a clean energy transition is misplaced in Wisconsin. And I think the context that you say about the quality of ore and the ability to use more ore and produce less tailings is really important. And that's just not the case for a lot of the mineral extraction that we're seeing proposed in Wisconsin. I wanted to, though, follow up with, you talked about the repeal of the Prove It First legislation. And I see here that in early 2021, the Wisconsin Natural Resources Board approved some new rules for sulfide mining. So what is the process for developing a mine in Wisconsin? What approvals are required and what oversight is there for mines in the state?
It's a multi-stage process, beginning with exploration and bulk sampling of the ore body to determine whether it's economically feasible ore body to invest in. And then after exploration and sampling of the rock, there is an environmental review process that could take several years that involves the compilation of an environmental impact statement that discloses the environmental, social, economic impacts of the project and provides an opportunity for the public to understand and challenge whatever assumptions and promises are made in that environmental impact statement. The process that is now underway for the Bend project and the Reef project in Wisconsin is at the exploration stage, and the company that is proposing this project is basically a marketing company. They do not have mining experience. They do not have the kind of financial resources that would be necessary to develop a full-blown project. They are dependent upon raising funds on the markets for investors to finance the development of these projects. And one of the things that has happened is that the exploration requirements in Wisconsin statutes require that when those drill holes are put in the areas where they expect to find resources, those holes can go several hundred feet down into the aquifers. And therefore, there are very careful requirements for putting in casing and other protective requirements that limit the amount of infiltration of groundwater from a surrounding area into the drill site where there are potential toxic exposures. In order for the company to fulfill its obligations, they have to fill those drill holes, remove the casing, and put cement down into those drill holes several hundred feet deep. And the company that is proposing both the Bend and the Reef deposit submitted an application where they did not disclose how they would get all this cement down several hundred feet into those drill holes. And the Department of Natural Resources has postponed any further decision on the project until those questions have been answered. And what that tells me is that these companies are selling the public with this green energy technology, which is a mythology, and they do not have either the technical or the financial expertise to actually do what they say they promise to do. And of course, that's also the case with the most advanced mining project on the Wisconsin-Michigan border, which is the Back 40 project, which is an open pit and combined underground operation 150 feet from the Menominee River, which is the river that divides Wisconsin and Minnesota. The initial permitting process that lasted 5 years, from 2015 till 2021, when the company challenged about its guarantees that it would not affect the wetlands, which is the predominant feature of this area around the Menominee River. It's all wetland. They failed to convince a judge in an administrative law court that they had fulfilled the requirements of disclosing the full impact of the operation on the wetlands, and they were denied a wetland permit. And once they were denied the permit, all of the other permits that were dependent upon the information in that wetland permit became obsolete. They withdrew from the project, declared bankruptcy, and sold their entire operation to a new company, which is now going through an entirely new permit process.
It seems to me that there seems to be a relatively robust process in place for mine development, but that for some reason, the companies that are proposing mines in metallic sulfite mines in Wisconsin and Michigan can't seem to adequately address the concerns in that process and get the approvals. Do you have a sense of why that is? Is it inherent in the mining process itself, or is it something to do with the companies that have been engaged thus far?
It's both. If you look at the location of where these proposals are being advanced, they're in predominantly wetland and very water-rich areas, which are very sensitive areas, and which the slightest mistake or the slightest lack of engineering on the part of the company poses a major threat to the integrity of those environmental resources. And there are communities, both Native American and non-Indian communities, that have been able to reach out to the larger expertise of the communities affected by mining in other parts of the country and other parts of the world to draw upon the technical and scientific expertise to give a careful reading to these environmental impact projects. And that has resulted in a number of challenges through the contested case process, which is a fairly standard part of the mine permit operation. But the other part of the problem is that the companies that are involved tend to be what are known in the industry as junior exploration companies, which are not mining companies at all. They are in the business of developing a project, getting permits, and then selling the project to a major company that does have the mining expertise and the resources to develop the project. So if you look at the Back 40 project, it was originally a combined venture between one of these exploration companies and Hudbay Minerals, which is a major Canadian mining company that did have the technical and financial resources to develop a project. But in the early 2000s, Hudbay Minerals pulled out of the project for whatever reason, probably because they saw there was a great deal of local opposition to the project, and left the other company to raise funds for putting the project through the permit process. And that company, by necessity, had to cut short the kind of extensive technical and scientific review that a larger company would not hesitate to engage in. So it's the financing of these projects on the one hand, and number two, the sophistication of the grassroots Indian and non-Indian opposition that raise serious questions about the project and pose another investment risk that is known in the industry as the lack of a social license to operate. What that means is that the company can go through a permitting process and get permission from the regulatory agencies. But if the company does not have the support of the communities in which they are located, that is a warning sign for investors that the lack of a social license may pose a problem for the stability of the project and the profitability of the project. And we know from all sorts of other cases around the country and in Latin America that when communities come out and vote overwhelmingly against the mining project, that tends to undermine investor confidence in the project, leading to a withdrawal of investment funds from the project and the shutdown of the project.
How can local communities benefit from mining operations, and what is their part in the process? I think part of our conversation thus far, you've talked about some other reservations and they're organizing against some of these operations, but I imagine in a well-regulated mining operation in a better situation, maybe that has existed somewhere in the Midwest, that social license to operate is dependent on the benefits delivered to that community and their willingness to engage, whether that's through jobs or local investment. So how have companies typically engaged communities in the successful mining operation?
Let's put it this way. The Flambeau mine in Ladysmith has been touted by the industry. And by the industry, I mean Rio Tinto, which is one of the largest mining companies in the world, which is the parent company of Flambeau Mining, as a successful sulfide mining operation, despite the fact that they have been judged to be contributing to the pollution of the Flambeau River from one of the streams on site. In fact, that was the subject of a Clean Water Act lawsuit that I was involved in 2011, where the federal district court judged that the company had not fulfilled the requirements of the Clean Water Act, and they were in violation of the act. That decision was overturned by appeals court in Chicago, which ruled that because the state of Wisconsin had issued them a permit without any limits on discharge, which is an illegal permit, they would have been required under federal law to get a national pollution elimination discharge permit. But because the state did not require that, the appeals court said that they couldn't be held liable. So the decision was overturned, but the pollution is still there. In fact, the EPA has declared that stream that is discharging into the Flambeau River as an impaired water, which means that there are copper and zinc toxic metals that are entering the water supply. So what the industry says is a successful mining operation, if you look at the facts, turns out to be not exactly what they are claiming it to be. But the other larger point about, what would be a successful mining operation, I was involved back in the early 1990s with a negotiation session between the Lac de Flambeau Chippewa tribe in Wisconsin and the Phelps Dodge Copper Corporation, which wanted to develop a copper deposit right on the reservation. The tribal council at Lac du Flambeau said, we would consider a joint venture where much of the decision-making authority rests with the tribal council, and much of the revenues would be allocated according to a formula developed by the tribe and the company. Phelps Dodge wanted nothing to do with that operation. I'm sure they felt that it would set a bad precedent for other communities and other tribes that want a greater share of the profits and a greater amount of control over the decision-making process regarding the development of the mining project. So we don't have, as far as I'm aware, very many examples of where you have successful community and corporate arrangements. There is one example where there's a community oversight board, and that is the Eagle Mine in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is a nickel and copper mine, where against the initial wishes of the Keweenaw Bay Indian community, project was permitted by the state of Michigan. And one of the compromises is that there was a community oversight board made up of the tribe and the local community and the company and the university that would monitor the mine and raise any objections if there were to be pollution violations. And that's about the closest I know of our joint arrangement, at least, between a mining company and a community. It is still not very protective because the waste material from that Eagle mine is being discharged into an abandoned mine site called the Humboldt mine site, where there are very little regulation of the mine waste discharges into that abandoned milling site. There are several notices of violation of the water quality standards by the state of Michigan, but the mine continues to operate nonetheless. The larger point, of course, about community benefits is that if you look at the history of communities that have accepted mining projects, my colleague at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, my late colleague, Bill Freudenberg, has done the most extensive research on what the benefits of mining were to those communities. And he found that over half of the communities where these mining operations have occurred not only have not benefited the community economically or socially, but the surrounding communities, which have not been dependent upon mining, did much better economically than did the mining communities.
That is a result of kind of the boom bust nature, as I understand, of some of these mines and the lack of sustainability. They ramp up, and then once they've achieved their goal, or they, like you said, they run into a problem, then they leave, and then the community is left with the mine site, and the jobs are lost, and the local tax revenue is also lost. Is that generally correct?
In fact, there's a study about copper sulfide mines being the largest source of taxpayer liability under the EPA's Superfund cleanup program. There's a report from the Center for Western Priorities that found that mines in the western states, and there are a lot more copper and zinc and gold mines in the western United States than in the Midwest, they have found that those liabilities could cost taxpayers up to $21 billion in cleanup costs from mines that have already been exhausted and left large piles of waste in their wake. Not only is it an environmental liability, it's also a financial liability.
Seems like there's some real hurdles to overcome, especially when it comes to metallic sulfide mining in the upper Midwest, due to the very wet nature of where these sites are and the low quality of ore. The last question I really wanted to dig in with you here, I think that the context of this conversation is one in which, if you look at the three pieces of legislation that just passed, the CHIPS Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Inflation Reduction Act, those three bills combined represent more energy investment from the federal government in the U.S. than in the next 10 years than the entire previous 30 years combined. And it's being billed as kind of like the largest climate investment in U.S. history. But in each of those bills, there are provisions that incentivize the redevelopment of domestic supply chains. We are an incredibly consumptive culture, And that transition to electrification, the US has kind of ceded much of the supply chains to China when it comes to some of these critical minerals. The United States has identified a whole list of critical mineral supply chains. We've identified the absolute need to develop supply chains if we want to move to electrical, which includes the deployment of solar and wind, which requires some sort of storage and electrification of vehicles. So there's undoubtedly going to be increased pressure in communities across the United States and in locations across the United States to extract these minerals and redevelop supply chains and manufacturing, which we, as you mentioned, we haven't done in a long time. And in the context of this conversation, everybody that I talk to says, that's all fine and good, but metallic sulfide mining is not the place to go looking for it because of the challenges and the history. And so I wonder if in your research that you have seen other locations, this context of, if not here, then where? Because if we're all, if we want to continue with an oil dependent economy, then we have all of the trade-offs of that. You can see the kind of like endless wars for oil that we've been fighting, since the first Gulf War and prior to that. And so where are these minerals going to come from? Where are the suitable sites? And I think that your disposition of really representing the local communities in these negotiations, as we used to say in the solar industry, how do you turn coal into diamonds? It's pressure, pressure, pressure. You got to put pressure on these companies to deliver the local benefit. So where, if not metallic sulfide mining, I guess, then the question is, where in the United States or in North America is it appropriate to explore these minerals, or what should we be doing?
There are two important points that you raise. One is about the motivation for all this legislation around the Inflation Reduction Act and electric vehicles to address climate change. One of the great hypocrisies of the mining industry, as well as the politicians that are pushing for even speedier permit processes, limit the amount of time that the public has to evaluate and respond to these permit applications, is that the process of extracting very low-grade ores from these marginal mine sites requires enormous amounts of fossil fuels. In other words, the energy that is required to crush and separate the valuable ores from the waste rock requires enormous amounts of fossil fuels that, in fact, contribute to climate change and that destroy both the wetlands and the forest resources that are now containing a lot of the carbon from escaping into the atmosphere and exacerbating the release of greenhouse gases. And so the very process of pursuing a path of extracting low-grade ores from very sensitive environments which already contain and provide a shield against further global emissions is counterproductive to the stated aims of the administration and the people concerned about climate change to solve the problem. The second thing is that some of the places that are being proposed to solve these supply chain problems, like the Tamarack mine in southeast Minnesota. It's a nickel cobalt sulfide mine at the headwaters of the Mississippi River, the Kettle River and the Mississippi River, and it's about 50 miles east of Duluth. This is a project, again, by a marketing company called Talon Minerals. That is not actually a mining company, that is backed by Rio Tinto, which is a mining company, but they are proposing to extract nickel in a sulfide ore body that would go hundreds of feet into the aquifer around the mine site and not only contribute to acid mine drainage, but also a lowering of the water table around the entire mine site, because as you dewater these underground mines to allow the exploration and extraction of the minerals, you have to get rid of the incoming water from the aquifer, and getting rid of that incoming water lowers the water table around the entire mine site. It's called a cone of depression, and that would significantly affect the entire ecosystem around that mine site. But the economic problem is significant as well, because nickel is so expensive right now, and there is such a high demand for it, that it's very discouraging for a company like Tesla, which manufactures these electric vehicles, to keep producing batteries that rely upon a very expensive raw material of nickel. And so they are experimenting a lithium iron phosphate called LSP, which does not rely upon nickel and cobalt, which is cheaper to produce, has a longer battery life. It has higher charge levels. It does better at low performance temperatures, like in the cold environment of the upper Midwest. And it's less expensive. And if you look at what Tesla is doing, according to their most recent earnings statement, they're telling investors that nearly half of the vehicles they are shipping are non-nickel LFP batteries. And eventually they will shift their entire production line from nickel batteries to this less expensive lithium iron phosphate battery. So by the time that a mine, if it were to be permitted in Minnesota at the Tamarack location by Talon Minerals, which is not a mining company, timeline would mean that the shift had already occurred in the industry from nickel to lithium iron phosphate. So it doesn't make any sense. And the only thing that makes sense, these Republican legislators who have just taken control of Congress, one of whom is in charge of the Natural Resources Committee in the National Congress, to introduce legislation that would limit the time that people have to evaluate these mining impact statements, and also limit the amount of time that they have to file lawsuits that would challenge the findings of any permit agency, like has been done with the Polymet project in the state of Minnesota, which is another copper nickel sulfide project, which has run into significant permitting problems because of their inability to meet the requirements of both the state and the Federal Clean Water Act and the waste storage facilities.
And one of the concerns, of course, which you've mentioned, and I think are compounded by your most recent comments, is that mining companies will use this context of a clean energy transition to market reduced regulation and reduced permitting time and reduced oversight to mine minerals that aren't necessarily critical to the transition, or that the process will take long enough to the point which we've moved beyond those minerals and have found something that's more available, less environmentally damaging, and less costly. That doesn't, however, reduce the trend that we will are seeing and will surely see of increased interest in domestic extraction of these minerals. And so I think it's been really informative to talk to you about some of the major concerns, both within the industry and in the communities, and kind of even with the trends in mining in general around some of these projects. Professor Geddix, is there anything else you'd like to say or add or talk about before we thank you for your time?
Just one more thing, and that is that there's a widespread perception in the general public, and especially in communities who are first confronted with these mining proposals, to assume that because of the reputation of the companies, or the lack of reputation of the companies, and the pressures by politicians and federal and state regulators and legislators to develop these projects, that there's little point in thinking that they can have an effective voice in raising questions that will protect their community. In other words, there's a tendency toward a certain amount of what I call the psychology of inevitability, that because of the large amounts of political and financial pressures to develop these projects, that communities think that they cannot have an effective voice to protect the resources that are important to those communities. And what the Crandon Mine Project, along with the Pamunkey Hills Iron Mining Project, which came after the Crandon mine failure, which would have been the largest open pit iron mine in the world, right on the banks of Lake Superior and upstream from the Bad River Tribe's wild rice beds, which is the largest coastal wild rice bed resource in the entire United States. Those communities have effectively used the same kind of alliance building tactics of constructing interest between native and non-native communities, environmental organizations, to evaluate and, if necessary, oppose mining projects. Those have set a very important precedent for communities all around the world. It's not just in Wisconsin, but Wisconsin just happens to be a very important place where significant grassroots efforts have stopped some of the largest mining companies in the world from developing projects which would have been disasters to both the local environment as well as the local economy.
Very well said, Professor Geddix. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate all of your history and knowledge around these topics.
Thank you.
The Rise Up Podcast, Season 4, Episode 8, Critical Mineral Mining. Special thanks to our guests, Snehamoy Chatterjee and Al Geddix, hosted by Nick Hyla and produced by Kyle Galloway, made possible with support from the Sally Mead Hands Foundation.